Principal, I call the member for Balmain.
Thank you, Mr Temporary Speaker. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak on behalf of the Greens on the Residential Parks Amendment Register Bill 2011. The aim of this bill is to strike a balance between park residents and operators so that residents can feel secure within this important sector. One of the important issues in regard to this bill, which is welcomed by the Greens, is how this government will seek to manage park residents, especially in light of the fact that there have been very significant issues raised by residents living in caravan parks and manufactured home villages. And one of the issues that has been most important, and I understand the government is seeking to address this, is the issue of rent rises. Now, this bill is proposing only to address the issue of the register, but the issue of rent rises is important, and the Greens were very active and involved with the Affiliated Residential Parks Residents Association, very involved with them during the election, and undertook a range of election commitments. And I just wanted to let the House know that the State President of the ARPRA, Leslie Wakeling, said in a release 6th of February 2011 that a year ago there were 898 applications to the Consumer Trader Tenancy Tribunal in regards to rent increases, but last year that almost doubled to 1,741. Rents are spiralling out of control, with most of park operators' average return on investment being around 20%. Not a bad return, I think, for any investment. And residential parks are becoming cash cows, and the buzzword lifestyle village and over 50s is costing residents dearly. And that goes to the heart of what I seek to be addressing the House on today, Mr Temporary Speaker, which is the importance of this provision of housing in the housing mix and the challenge that we have here as a parliament and as a community to deal with affordable housing. Now, many members will know I'm the member for Balmain. There aren't too many caravan parks in Balmain, but there are pressures. The minister might like to have one there. It'd be a great spot to have a caravan in many of those areas. But the issue here that needs to be addressed, and I welcome the government's attention to this register, is the issue of affordable housing. Now, we Greens in the last period of Parliament moved a bill, which was moved by Sylvia Hale in the other place, to address this issue, to ensure that developers, when they build multi-unit developments, are required to provide a certain amount of affordable housing. What does that mean? It means provide it to a non-government organisation or a council, other organisations, to ensure that our key workers can be housed. One of the great challenges is that many of us who have children and are growing to an age when they're in the workforce will have that great challenge if they're a nurse or a teacher or a firefighter or a police officer. Unless you're earning $80,000, $90,000 a year, you can't live in the inner city, you can't live close to your work. Living in Sydney is becoming increasingly unaffordable, and this measure, these residential parks, are another factor in that. People moving to residential parks, to these facilities, to these places, which in many cases are wonderful, great environments, but the pressure which is pushing people to these areas is the pressure of the lack of affordable housing. So the important issues that are being addressed by this bill only go to the extent of the register, so that this government can have an understanding of who the people involved in this issue are. But I encourage the government to take that next step after this has been approved, to follow the policy of the Liberal Nationals that was welcomed by the Park Residents Association, which recognised a whole lot of significant problems in the sector. Now, the bill inserts into the Residential Act 1998 a new Part 3A, dealing, not the old Part 3A, not the old Part 3A that the former government introduced, which took away planning controls from local communities. The bill inserts into the Residential Parks Act 1998 a new Part 3A dealing with the establishment and maintenance of a register. Under the proposed Section 142A, park owners and or park managers are required to provide certain information about their park for entry in the register. Under the proposed Section 142B, either the park owner or manager will need to notify Fair Trading if they open a new residential park, or if there is a significant change to the information they have previously registered. As I've mentioned, Mr Temporary Speaker, we Greens support this bill, which provides a vital regulation for this very important sector. Residential parks are an appropriate and viable form of affordable housing, and we must support the owners, operators and residents of residential parks to ensure the viability of this industry. And this is particularly important because of the rising march of the development industry that are eyeing off a lot of these caravan parks and other facilities in order for large-scale development, which reduces the stock of affordable accommodation in our communities. Now, residential parks are an important provider of both tourist and long-term residential accommodation in New South Wales. The Greens support the creation of mechanisms which will better protect the many thousands of people living in this style of accommodation. And I note in the press release that I quoted recently that the Vice President, Gary Martin, said of the ARPRA that legislative changes were urgently needed to better protect the 90,000 residents living in this style of accommodation, Mr Temporary Speaker. 90,000 residents, many of whom are doing it tough, and we need to be doing whatever we can to support them. As we heard in the Minister's speech, it's estimated that there are around 950 approved caravan parks and manufactured home estates operating in New South Wales, and this bill aims to be an important first step in examining ways to licence park operators, ensuring better education for new operators, and providing options to improve the process for resolving excessive rent increase claims by residents. And that is one of the major challenges. There has been some enormous increase in rents, as I mentioned, and the onus of proof does need to be reversed, because people who live in these forms of accommodation don't have the same protection as normal tenancy agreements. They don't have the same protections as those people living in public and social housing. So it's important that we seek to defend these lower income earners, which they generally are, to ensure that this sector remains strong and vibrant. And in our view, it's imperative that affordable housing is made more accessible, particularly for highly disadvantaged people within our communities. We believe that housing is a basic human right and that every person is entitled to have access to affordable, appropriate, safe and secure housing. More than 267,000 low-income households in New South Wales live in housing stress and pay more than 30% of their income on housing costs. The escalating costs of renting or buying a new home, when coupled with the decreasing availability of social housing, results in a growing number of people experiencing housing-related poverty, inappropriate housing and homelessness. Now, I'll move to conclusion, to the delight of some of the members opposite, on this issue, addressing the matter of what used to be called public housing, social housing. The waiting list for public housing is now over 70,000 people, 70,000 people seeking public housing. And they're many of the people who are the most distressed and vulnerable in our community. And it's a great challenge for this government to work with the Commonwealth Government to seek funding to invest not only in the maintenance of these facilities but in the provision of new facilities. And unless the Parliament grapples with the issue of affordable housing, unless we change the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act to make sure that when developers build these large-scale developments, a significant proportion of the new housing stock is available for affordable housing. So that's housing which is rented below market rents in order to provide accommodation for so many key workers in our communities who have to live in the wonderful Camden or Bella Vista or further out west or north or south in order to often get to the city and to the CBD to work. It's not an appropriate transport model for this state, increasing congestion on our roads, increasing congestion on our public transport networks. We need people to be living near where they live, and that means we need affordable housing. We need people working near where they live. Balmain's a great community. Living in Rozelle or Haberfield or Glebe, we want those people to be able to have diverse communities, where it's not just elites in our society who can afford the very expensive housing in some areas of the electorate, but where there's diverse housing where working class people that have jobs that are manual jobs, for example, or blue-collar jobs, can live close to their places of employment. We need that to be the case. That's why we need diverse industrial stock in all of our communities, diverse housing stock, and caravan parks, to provide for a diversity in our community. So, Mr Temporary Speaker, this bill is an important first step. I commend the Minister for taking this step to develop the register, and I encourage him to take the next steps, which is to increase the protection for people that are living in these parks and forms of accommodation, in particular against high rent increases. And these residential parks have provided an important source of affordable housing for many low-income and elderly people. Many elderly people in particular who are struggling to find a place for their children to live, recognising that their children will find it difficult to find the accommodation that they once took for granted. Yet many of these people, as I've mentioned, are being forced out because of the needs of developers, undermining the capacity of these residential parks to take on the affordable housing component which they're providing in our community. So, Mr Temporary Speaker, I welcome this measure in the House. I encourage the government to take further steps to ensure affordable housing in our community, to provide not only for those vulnerable people in our community, but also for the key workers in our community who need good quality, affordable accommodation in the future. Thank you.
Before I call the member for Mile Lakes, I wish to acknowledge the presence in the Visitors Gallery today of the Singleton News Group, guests of the very